Hello, folks. I hope that you enjoy the reading here of the book that I've published. It's first attempt at this type of thing that I'm doing. A story told to me by my father when I was sitting on his knee as a boy, 3 or 4 years old. And he told me the stories over and over. And after a while, I was telling him when he was making a mistake, that no, Dad, that's not how it is. This is the way the story goes. And that was like a light bulb moment for him and I both that I knew the stories. It's been a long time now. I wrote this book, sat down with a pencil and paper and a cell phone in my left hand, which is a spell checker, and here I am sitting here talking to you folks. This is my, like I say, the first one. It's kind of interesting. I can sort of tell you a little bit about it. I talk about the introduction. My name is Gerald Galuza, but most of me call me Jerry. I was born in Bath, Maine, and lived in Woolwich, about 8 miles from where I was born in 1951. I have been writing for about 17 years or so, but seriously for about 6 years now. I ran a blacksmith shop, welding shop for over 50 years. My wife, Beverly Ann, worked with me as a woman blacksmith for over 40 years or so. We lived in a small family farm, and we had cows, pigs, and chickens, ducks, geese, and much more. We also had very big Belgian draft horses. For many years, we gave rides to the public with a big red wagon, and the children loved it.
All right, so let's talk about the book. I'm looking at the table of contents. What was Wash Day about? Wash Day.
Wash Day. Oh, that was an interesting story.
Yeah.
My grandmother, Melvina, she took in these lumberjacks as boarders, and she'd have up to 30, 35 men that she fed and washed their clothes, and plus she had a big family. And so they were all sitting around on the front porch of a big farmhouse one Saturday, and so my grandmother's over there with a scrub board, and everybody was surprised, jumped in the air because she kicked over the wash tub and the water went going across the porch, and the clothes was there, and she held up her hands all bleeding. She says, "Yep, I'm all done. You want to wash your clothes and you go and wash them yourself. I ain't washing no more clothes." So at this point, she walks off into the house and everybody is up in arms. And my grandfather says to one of the older boys, "Quick, go get the logging truck. We're going to Rumford." Well, everybody asked, "What are you going to Rumford for?" "Well, we're going to go to Rumford buy a washing machine." So they went downtown and they bought the first washing machine that was sold in the town of Rumford, and it had a gasoline engine on it.
What?
And you had to take it, had like a foot start, and you'd turn this little aluminum knob on it for gas and everything, and then you'd kick this thing like a motorcycle, and you'd run it off. And so they convinced her to continue washing clothes for everybody.
Okay. So what was Prohibition time? What was that about?
Well, Prohibition was when the government, they had the suffrage movement, if I remember correctly, and they finally convinced the government that alcohol was evil and that they needed to outlaw just say that you couldn't drink no more.
That was like the Al Capone days in like the 30s?
1922, I think 22? It was. They started Prohibition, and that took care of marijuana, opium, cocaine, everything.
Right.
They just said everything was going to be made illegal.
Okay.
So at that point, there was the big shots were involved in it, making lots of money, like the Kennedy family. They made a lot of money off of Irish whiskey, become very rich. And they become president. So,
yeah, right.
So that's the way it goes. But
yeah.
So anyhow, my grandfather came from Russia. He was a Cossack soldier he was a palace guard for the last Tsar Nicholas Romanov from Russia. And so it turns around that they had a distillery in the compound where the royal family lived, and so my grandmother knew about alcohol making, wine making, and stuff. So they were making some alcohol and selling it to the lumberjacks.
Right.
So then, weren't long before there was a lot of bootleggers coming around wanting to, sell stuff. These men were talking to different people.
So that's bootleggers on the docks.
So the bootleggers on the dock is when this one man named Jerry Palmer, he ended up going down. He got word that they had a load of whiskey for him all. Now, he mostly ran whiskey out of Canada, but he did it. They had a shipload come in from Europe, so he ended up going down with his Rolls Royce, and he backs into this big factory building where his organization he worked for. So when he got in there, he found out that none of the people he knew hardly had any guns. There was always men with guns, and there was a whole new bunch of people, but they were heavily armed. So his men that he knew, fellow rum runners, they were sitting around waiting to get loaded, and there was all these new people that was getting loaded before them. So finally, he's asking his other men that he knew, what's going on here? Well, I don't know, but I'm pretty nervous. I think we ought to get the hell out of here, but I'm afraid they'd shoot me if I tried to leave. So they were very violent men. Killing was just second nature to a lot of them.
Pretty much dock people and the gunmen.
Say again?
Dock people and the gunmen?
Yeah.
That's what's that about?
Yeah, all about the armed guards. So finally, there was one armed man come over because he had gone over to talk to one of his people that he knew.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, get back to your own car, and wait your turn. They didn't want him to be talking to anybody. So anyhow, he asked him, well, how long are we going to get loaded? He says, soon, over his shoulder, very surly. So it ended up, they finally loaded 500 gallons of moonshine into the 1929 Rolls Royce. And it was interesting. My father saw him, he opened up the hood, and my father saw it had a V16 engine with these brass push rods going up and down on each side. And he said that it was the machine guns. He had run a roadblock, and so they gave him a direction and a bill of lading and all that where he was going, and they wanted him to know that he was going to follow a certain route. So if they told him there's going to be a cop pulling out behind you, so don't worry about it. Well, that worried him when it finally happened. So the cop followed him. He went across this bridge, and he had to make a left-hand corner. And when he come around it, he saw a federal roadblock. There was about 15 cop cars there, and men with machine guns and shotguns, and they're all waiting for him. So he stopped, and there was a big logging chain across the road, and there was cars in the road that he knew he couldn't get by the cars. Well, the logging chain went up the side of a hill, and so he said, I'm going to try for it, So according to Wikipedia, that V16 was an aircraft engine, and it developed 2,800 horsepower or something like that. I mean, it was incredible, So anyhow, he downshifted her, and he went up the hill, and he hit that logging chain across his radiator. Well, he snapped the chain off, but he hit it so hard that it dragged all these cop cars, and he rolled over a bunch of cop cars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he's coming down the hill, and there's a guy with a machine gun, and he looks and he sees him, and he lays down on the front seat, and the guy shoots across his windshield with a machine gun, and you hear the bullets going over his head and breaking some of the whiskey that's behind him. So then this other guy with a machine gun shoots down his driver's side, and he right across the door, and he can hear the bottles breaking. Well, he had put in some steel plates on his door, and he had two big tires mounted on each side, so the bullets didn't penetrate through to kill him. So he come down over the hill, and he's downshifting some more, or upshifting, and he's taking off down the highway. Well, they shot him with buckshot. He had two flat tires on one side. Well, these guys are running, trying to find a cop car that going. Well, he knew they had small engine, so he was out of sight in no time. Before they knew it, he was doing 100 miles an hour down the highway. Well, it was a dirt road at that time. So anyhow, he finally got a guy that could work on the car, and he put some across the block. He took rags and wooden plugs, and they filled the holes, and then the radiator was leaking. So he's talking to the guy. Well, how far do you think I can get? Oh, I don't know. He said, you might make it 50 miles down the road or something like that. But he was talking to him. He didn't want to tell him where he was really going, because he had already made his plans to go north instead of south like they wanted him to. So he finally said, well, he's over in Newbury, Massachusetts at this time. And so at this point, he had come out of Newburyport. So anyhow, he decided to go up into Massachusetts, and he went into Vermont, New Hampshire, and into Maine. And when he got into Maine, he went up to Rumford Center Point, where my grandfather's farm was. And so up there, he was my father heard him coming up the road. It sounded like a thrashing machine coming. So he hollered quick at him, quick, open up the barn doors before somebody sees me. So he he drives the car, and well, the car was so hot that the sparks was coming down, and it was setting the barn on fire. The hay underneath the barn, and my father had about 15 pails of water sitting there for the men when the horses come home that night from logging. They would have water. Well, geez, they start throwing water underneath the car so it wouldn't burn the barn down. So, so at this point, he wanted to see about getting the whiskey hidden, and he's asking my father a bunch of things, and father's coming up with different ideas. Well, they finally decided that they had come up with a good way of hiding it. So they hid it underneath 100 tons of loose hay, and so my grandfather come home. My grandmother told him what had happened, and so they decided at this point that they had to get him out of there because the feds could show up, in the next 10 minutes. So they hid him up in the lumber camps, way back in the woods. And so the feds came. They had about 50, 60 men. There was all kinds of police, guys, and they came onto the property and threatening my grandfather, telling us that they had a federal warrant to search his farm. They searched everything. And so for 3 days, 7 men pitched hay in up in the barn, and they never found anything. So I got some nice pictures that I drew, paintings that I did. I got 6 of them for the illustrations.
Okay.
And so at this point, anyhow, it turns around that the feds were pretty mad because they couldn't find nothing, so they split. Well, before all of this happened, that night he took the Rolls Royce and went, started her up in the barn, backed her out, went down about probably 5 or 6 miles from my grandfather's farm. And this man knew roads all through New England. He was an expert on roads at that time. So he had a nice spot, a cove that was on the Androscoggin River. So he drove the car down across the field and drove it into the river. And I suspect it's still there today.
So all you antique enthusiasts out there, if y'all want to find that car, read the book.
Yeah. If you're serious about finding it, I think I can show you the spot. It's an interesting story. I'm working on a sequel to it that is kind of the same thing, but that's going to be Blood on the Mountains.
Okay.
And that's a very interesting. My sister's been working with me on this one, and she said to me, there was parts, Jerry, I'm reading it, and she says, I set the book down and I just bawled my eyes out. She says, it's so emotional, so I'm saying, well, that's a good thing. That's going to get people's attention.
So if anybody need to look up any of your books, any information on you, where would they look at? Like as far as buying your book, where would they buy the book at?
Amazon at this point is, that's going to change eventually, but Amazon, you can look up Whiskey, Rolls, Royce and Tommy Guns. I have a second book that you may want to look into, and it's Melvina's Adventures.
Yeah, we're going to promote that book on the next episode. And everybody look out for the book, look out for more podcasts, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.